Welcome to How to Beat the Difference with your hosts, Johanna and Paul. A podcast for the career you want, or maybe just that push you need. If you want to know what your dream career looks like, join us to get inspiration from industry experts that will make that dream career a reality. Hello and welcome to How to Be the Difference with your host, Johanna Molina.
And Paul Linsky.
Paul, hello. How are you today?
I'm okay today, Joanna, and I'm a little nasally, I think.
I
That's
know.
the way to describe it, because I have COVID, unfortunately.
How are you feeling?
I'm okay now. Yeah, like I'm through the worst of it, I think. I think there was a tough 48 hours there where it was kind of like, what was surprising was I had a pain in my back. Like, does that happen? I didn't know that happened. I was there Googling it, and then before you know it, you think that's the worst thing you can do is Google like a sickness. But
yes, of course. Yeah.
yeah.
Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that.
No,
it's always gonna kill you, whatever you look in Google.
Oh, 100%. But yeah, no, back pain is apparently a symptom of COVID. So I was like, oh, okay. But
An age.
An age, yeah. Yeah, well, let's not get into that. But yeah, so it was a rough 48 hours, but I'm feeling a lot better now.
Oh, well, still. I'm very good. I'm very good still. I'd like to really quickly say happy birthday to you, Paul. I hope you have a wonderful one.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thanks. I'm never saying anything to you again off camera. Joanna, how are you?
I'm great and excited about our guest today. Gina is absolutely incredible, and I'm pretty sure all our people are going to really love this episode.
Absolutely. And before I'll let you introduce Gina and we can get straight into it. If you, wherever you listen to us, whether it's Spotify, or actually somebody came to me the other day and said, oh, I listened to it on Spotify, how do I like it or whatever, just follow the podcast on Spotify. That will do us the world of good. Or wherever you get your podcast, if you can leave a review or just follow it, that's great. It all helps. And Johanna, would you like to kick it off with Gina?
Yes, so we have Gina Gotthilf. Gina is a co-founder and CEO at Latitude, a platform helping build the next generation of iconic tech startups in Latin America through a dedicated fellowship and fund. Gina also previously led growth and marketing at Duolingo and took it from 3 to 200 million users. She was part of the executive team, oversaw early partnerships, communication strategies, A/B testing, growth sprints, and other responsibilities in an ever-changing startup environment. She also worked on the Mike Bloomberg's presidential campaign, helping oversee the creation of digital ad campaigns at a historical daily spend. Gina has a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Brandeis University, where she co-authored a neuroscience study about sociocultural differences in memory and aging. Gina, it's a real pleasure having you with us today. Please tell us, where in the world are you right now?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm actually in Miami, but I'm originally from Brazil, and I've lived in the United States for 17 years. And I just moved to Miami last year, kind of by mistake.
Oh, wow. We can't wait to hear more about it. Could you please tell us a bit more about your background and your journey?
Yes, my journey has been very zigzaggy. It's been a very wiggly line, so to speak. I grew up in Brazil. I thought I wanted to be a filmmaker or an actress. That's kind of what I started to do. Or at one point, I wanted to be that woman who like does the thing where you like make the dolphin jump in SeaWorld. You know, like those were the two careers I was most interested in. But the acting and film writing one and directing, I was serious about actually, and I was very into theater. But I was also a super overachiever, and I did like the 3 diplomas that we had in my school only because I was really afraid that I wouldn't get into any university and that like things wouldn't work out. And my parents told me that if I wanted to study abroad, I had to get like a 50% scholarship. Anyway, those were the wrong decisions, by the way. In retrospect, I shouldn't have done any of that, and we can talk about that another time. But that's fine. So I was super overachiever, and then went to study philosophy because I thought that would give me an interesting lens through which to look at film writing, and then anthropology, because I wanted to understand human behavior, and Chinese. So those are the things I went to study at Reed, which is a school where Steve Jobs went and dropped out. And then I also dropped out because I thought that that's how you become successful after Steve Jobs. I know didn't work out super well. I'm kidding. I dropped out because I got actually extremely depressed and like fell into very deep depression, and then couldn't go to class. Like I couldn't get out of my room. And then I went to Brazil, back home. I remember my brother being like, saying something like, "Oh, the only way you're gonna get out of that couch is if you roll out of it," or something. So like he didn't understand I was depressed, and I was just like eating and sleeping. But you know, things got better, but it took about a year. And then I went back to school, and then switched to just doing philosophy and Chinese. Stopped anthropology, and then quickly realized that I had no skills. And because I went to talk to my college career counselor, and she said, "What have you done with your whole life?" And it was like such a smack in my face, because I'd been overachieving my whole life. And I was like, how can you say that? Like, I've been working so hard. And I realized, oh, you know what? The world wants to see impressive things on my resume that like sound impressive. Fine. So I'm going to go work at a neuroscience lab and study neuroscience because it sounds impressive. And so that's exactly what I did. And then I co-authored a neuroscience study. And just so that I could go and, you know, apply to 100 jobs after graduating at the height of the recession, like 2008, 2009. And no one was interested in hiring me. I also needed a visa. So I ended up getting an internship in digital media because it's the only thing I got. Really, I applied to 100 different jobs. I didn't hear back from probably 95 of them. I got one no, and then a couple other things didn't pan out, and this one did. And can you imagine like getting a digital media job to write social media posts, and your interview was like, "Yeah, let me tell you about my neuroscience study that I co-authored." It's like it just what is this world, you know? But anyway, so I worked in digital media for a while, and Louis Vuitton, Hennessy, like fashion, beauty, which were not industries that I actually liked, but I really wanted to live in New York, and so I just did it anyway. Ended up giving up on all of that, going back to Brazil because I got laid off. And then that's kind of when my career started, really. And by then I was already 25. I didn't know my career was going to start. I just thought I'm done with this whole thing of like trying to climb the ladder, and I hate it. Like this is meaningless. Like I don't see the point. I never did. That's why I studied philosophy. I'm going to go, you know, I don't know, live very simply somewhere. I'm going to go live on a farm, and I'm going to work on the farm, and that's like how I'm going to make my living. That was my plan. And that's when, like, you know, I can double click on any of these things. But then Tumblr got in touch with me and asked me to launch, to help them grow Tumblr in Brazil. And long story short, I ended up doing that for all of Latin America. Then I started doing that for a lot of different startups, and then became an early employee at Duolingo, became their head of growth and marketing, led growth from 3 to 200 million users, and was part of the executive team. Had no idea Duolingo was going to become this big. Obviously, I joined because of the mission to bring free language education to the world that I really believed in, because I got the opportunity to learn English, and I thought that was something that most people wouldn't have the opportunity to do, and could really double or triple their income potential. And yeah, after that, worked on one of the presidential campaigns in the US, and worked on a nonprofit working on universal basic income in East Africa for a bit. And most recently started a company a year and a half ago. It's called Latitude. And we're basically focused on like 10xing the Latin American tech ecosystem and making it super successful and well known around the world from a lot of different angles, from like early stage entrepreneurs all the way to the investment side.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. There's a lot in there. And you know, Gina, when we sat down previously just to have a discussion with the guest, myself and Johanna do this, and we had to look through your profile and your background. There's so much like milestones you've hit. And I suppose I'll start early with this question, but what are you most proud of?
I am most proud. I mean, look, it's like, yeah, I helped Duolingo grow from 3 to 200 million users. That's a really nice talking point, and I am proud of everything we did there at Duolingo, and the people that we were able to reach, and really actually empowering people to learn a language, and especially English, around the world at scale. So I'm really proud of that. I think I'm really proud also of going from like getting out of depression and being where I am today, because when you are in that moment, it doesn't seem like things are going to work out. And I'm really proud of Latitude. It's going really well, and I'm excited about the impact we might have on Latin America in terms of propelling entrepreneurship, creating hundreds, if not thousands, if not more, of jobs, maybe having an actual impact on the GDP, and yeah, maybe, you know, really impacting the lives of millions of people.
Amazing, amazing. And let's talk about those three topics then in that order. We can talk about Duolingo, Latitude, and then obviously mental health and depression, which is super, super important. Talking about Duolingo and what you just said about growth, how do you actually take a company from 3 to 200 million users? What were those like key learnings from your time at Duolingo?
It's there's no right answer to this question, unfortunately, because it really depends. Of course, there's a lot of things that you learn along the way, but the first time I really started working with growth was when Tumblr asked me to help them grow in Brazil. And it's funny because I had no experience doing that. Like, I was doing digital PR for Estee Lauder before. I consider myself like fairly smart and hardworking, but really was like, how? And they were like, oh yeah, by the way, we have no budget, which was the same thing with Duolingo. It's like, can you make us grow for free? And I love challenges. And so what I started doing with Tumblr, which ended up becoming part of like a big part of the strategy with Duolingo, was, you know, I think what they're doing is super interesting. I think that there's these like interesting American guys behind it. And in Brazil, people tend to be interested in like what the US is doing. So maybe I can get journalists to write about this. And if journalists write about this, then I can reach huge audiences for free. Okay, well, how do I get I didn't realize this was PR, by the way, at the time, because I didn't like, I just was like, maybe if I just go on LinkedIn and find journalists, and then I can like write a message that's super compelling, and they respond to me, maybe I can schedule an interview, and then we'll go from there. And looking back, we were able to schedule a lot of interviews with major journalists in Brazil, then in Chile, then Argentina, and that had a huge impact on Tumblr's growth. And it's not just the reaching out, that it's like coming up with reasons for journalists to care. So for example, doing a big launch event, or running the biggest meetup they'd ever had with 1,200 people. And then doing a story about that. And so building stories and then reaching out to journalists to get those stories out. With Duolingo, I started the same, because I was like, okay, this seems to be working. So they came to me and they said, we want to grow. And I was like, well, I already know a lot of the journalists, so half the battle is won there. And now I kind of also understand what are the messages that like interest them. So I'm going to do this again. And then coming up with reasons for journalists to care about what Duolingo was doing, over and over in different ways. And then across the world, I went and implemented the strategy in Turkey, India, China, Japan, Korea, Spain, Mexico. And the playbook looked something like, okay, if I reach out to a journalist, they don't know who I am, they don't know who Luis Fanon, founder and CEO of Duolingo, is. They don't know what Duolingo is. So how do I get them to care about the message I'm going to send to them? Well, journalists care about things that are well known. So for example, big well-known universities or big well-known conferences. Okay, so if I can get involved with those like signifiers, then suddenly like this becomes actually relevant to them. So if I'm able to say, hey, Luis Fanon was invited by Boğaziçi University, which is the top university in Turkey, to give a talk. In that case, we actually were able to do like a commencement speech, which is even more amazing. But in India, we did like just a normal talk to students at IIT Delhi, which is the top university there, because there's going to be one professor at this university who's going to know that Luis Fanon is amazing. He's going to get it. Like, who's the person who's going to get it? It's going to be a professor, and they're going to go to the top of the school and say, we need this person to come and give a talk. And then we're going to like do everything we can to make this talk look as amazing as possible. And then we'll reach out to journalists and tell them that the university invited them for a really impressive thing. And in general, try to do that with two things at a time, so it seemed even more important, like a university and a big conference. And so we went and did that around the world, and it worked really well. And then we also realized that, of course, like the App Store made a big difference, like whether you got featured at the time, like on the iOS store, for example, you saw a big uptick in downloads. So it was a step-by-step process. And I think that the key there is learning how to prioritize initiatives. So you come up with a bunch of ideas of how to make something grow, which means getting it into the hands of the right people, if it's an acquisition move, right? And you have to assume that you're working with a good product or a good brand or something that like people actually are going to like. You can't just take a crappy thing and try to make it grow. That you're going to fail. If it's good and people are going to like it, that means you have like a solid enough retention. So let's just focus on the acquisition. How do you get it into the hands of people? Later, even how do we improve retention, which is so important? How do we get people coming back, either a subscription or just using your app or whatever? And the idea is coming up with all the ideas, like don't reject any of them, and then learning how to prioritize them based on ROI and then executing. And I think that's super key because everything we did at Duolingo was focused on metrics, even PR. So it wasn't just like brand awareness. It was like this interview led to however many thousands of downloads. Okay, that's our key metric that we care about. It's downloads because that impacts daily active users, which is our North Star metric, the thing that we're caring the most about. So everything we do needs to impact that metric. And every time we think about what we want to do, we thought about what is the potential impact on that metric and how much time is it going to take us to implement, and then prioritize. I think that's key. And then just being creative and getting ideas from everyone around you. And that's basically it, honestly.
Wow. It's amazing. It's really valuable. It's really, really valuable. And in terms of engagement, actually, of the actual platform, one thing we were discussing prior to you jumping on the call with Paul is that I'm extremely impressed by the way that Duolingo is designed. I mean, I was telling Paul that I have my father in Colombia learning English in Duolingo, and I have my father-in-law in the UK learning Spanish with Duolingo. And I'm like, this is crazy. How do you actually build a product where even elderly people feel so confident to use it? So I wonder if you had a target audience at the beginning, and maybe this is also related to your neuroscience study as well.
Well, there's so many things to say here. I'll start by saying that like the design in itself of Duolingo is amazing and has evolved so much. And our head of design, Tyler, he's still there. I'm not there anymore, but Tyler was there since the beginning. It is particularly interesting because Tyler was an intern at Duolingo and he was a Spanish intern. So he was hired to help produce Spanish content. And he's this gringo who had like lived abroad or something like that. And then he started doing designs, and then he like really loved designs. And long story short, Tyler is extremely talented and is now the head of design at Duolingo. And I think, even though, we had like our little rivalries back in the day, I think he can be credited with so much in terms of like making Duolingo look like what it does today. And so I just wanted to give him a shout out. And then of course, Luis Vanon, the co-founder and CEO, had a really great eye for design too, which is interesting and important because even in moments when we thought, if we do this, we think we'll see growth, if it compromised design and the experience of the user and the delight that they would experience in using the product, we wouldn't do it. And so that's one thing that's interesting to note. In terms of the target audience, that's also something I think that's unusual about Duolingo when I talk to most other companies, which is that we really just decided to go broad. We're like, we're going to target anyone who wants to learn a language. We're not going to go for kids. We're not going to go for young adults. And we're just going to make this the best product for learning a language that there ever was. And a lot of people would come to us and be like, no, but I want business English. Oh, no, but I want like this. It's like, no, we believe that learning a language means that you need to fundamentally just learn the language like a child. You have to learn how to say bear. And you have to, because if you learn how to say, oh, I don't know, where is the PowerPoint presentation? Then you don't understand the answer. And it's just like, how far does that actually get you? So anyways, we really went broad. And of course there was a core audience, which is exactly who you would expect, which is young adults, like in early 20s, who are super mobile, adapt, and interested in apps and looking to further their career. They and already used to that kind of world. That ended up being like our biggest user base, so something like 20 to early 30s. But that's, I think, was the case for probably most apps around the world. And then we started growing in other demographics too, like trying to understand how to get into schools and how to get kids to use Duolingo and how to get older adults. But all of these things started happening organically because the product was designed to be just good. Our marketing was very broad, which meant that like everything was broad stroke. So where most marketing teams will be like, you need to segment your audience and you need to think of like the message that you're going to send to this audience. So you'd be like, no, one message to everyone. Everyone's the same. And we're just going to send one email. And that gives us more users to test things with. So we get the statistical significance more quickly. It also means that as we go across the world and people try to convince us that their country is different and that we need to communicate with people in their country differently, we would just normally ignore and just treat people like they're all vanilla and the same, which also allowed us to move more quickly and reduce complexity from like a development standpoint, because once you start like deploying different solutions for different markets, you then every time you want to do something new, you have to go and pay attention to all of those different cases, and it's super complicated. So we really went broad, and it's super interesting because we had amazing stories that we got to tell as part of social media and our marketing strategy even, but even internally to like warm the hearts of the team, because we were all there for the mission. And there were actually a lot of stories of grandparents who started learning a language to communicate with their grandchild's significant other, or like people who discovered grandparents or like couldn't communicate with their grandparents abroad and wanted to, you know, to do that. And grandparents or older people who were in hospital, for example, and just wanted to keep their minds active and started learning a language, even though they never thought that they were interested in that. So a lot of amazing stories. And then of course schools came, and then finally Duolingo launched Duolingo for kids. I forgot if that's what the name is, because they launched, you know, the actual app I think after I left. And so we started growing that way, but it's always been broad. And with regards to neuroscience, Johanna, it's interesting that you mentioned that. The truth is that I don't, like, really speaking candidly to you guys, I don't really think that neuroscience helped me at all, other than to sound impressive to people. And like, yeah, of course, like I studied, I learned, I'm sure everything you learn, you use somehow in your brain, and it's like brain gym, you know, and like you try to work on hard things and your brain gets better at it. But it's interesting because the study that I quote unquote co-authored, I did co-author it, but I just think it's kind of ridiculous because like I was like, you know, I was in the lab and like I was like the non-neuroscience student doing it, but like I was there and I became close with the professor. Was about aging and cognition. It actually was about memory and how that changes as you age in different cultures. We focused on the West versus Eastern cultures broadly, meaning like the US and China. So it could have been really relevant, but it wasn't.
Oh, we were trying to add them two together there in ahead of time. We're like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. But yeah, and like Duolingo definitely worked because like I started relearning all the Irish I learned in school. You can actually learn Irish on it, and for shame, I don't know how to speak it properly or fluently.
Well, Paul, actually, just the interesting thing is we got a prize from who is it the president of Ireland?
Yes, Michael D. Higgins.
Yes, exactly, him. We got a prize, so we had someone fly out there and get a prize because with Duolingo we actually greatly increased the number of people who spoke Irish, like noticeably, because people in Ireland weren't studying Irish as kids and they wanted to maintain their heritage, and suddenly all of these Americans mainly were like, oh, I want to be in touch with my Irish heritage, and then also Irish kids were like, oh, maybe I will learn this, and so we actually had an impact on like preserving the Irish language.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't expect that to come out there. That's
You're mute, Paul.
Sorry, I'll mute myself there. Yeah, and it is really, really good. It's kind of better than how it's taught in schools over here, which is crazy. And I'm sure you found that across the world.
Yeah, that was kind of the goal of Duolingo. So learning a language is super tough. You need to stick with it, and you can't just like do a bunch of it in one day and then like come back to it a week later. You have to do like it every day, and it takes years. So it's super tough. And then not only that, and then not only like, you know, most schools don't offer most languages, but even the schools that do offer languages. So for example, in Latin America, it's very common that you study English in school. In the US, it's very common that you learn Spanish in school. But it's very uncommon that you actually learn a language in school. Like talk to any American and ask them if they speak Spanish, and they'll say something funny like taco, and that's about it. And then in Brazil, it's the same. Like actually less than 3% of our population speaks English. And I even question what exactly that English looks like. And so the truth is that we haven't or hadn't evolved education or educational formats for a very long time. And we just assume that what is needs to be, you know, continue being, so to speak. And if you study how to learn a language, you want to teach kids how you learn a language, and there's all this theory behind it, and it's like, you know, whatever. But then who's actually measuring the impact and whether people are learning a language from start to end? It's very difficult. You have tests and stuff like that. But a teacher, think about it, like if she's in a class with like, let's say 20 students, even if it's 100 students, and she notices after one semester that like this worked, but this didn't work. Actually, like next time I think I'm going to do this lesson before this lesson because students were confused, or I think I'm going to do this or that. Like, first of all, like, they're not going to have statistical significance to know if like those results were like real, so to speak. And then they'll evolve in the next semester and they'll try something different, but it's still like not a very good study. They won't be communicating all of those findings with the teacher next door, let alone teachers around the country or the world. And so everyone's doing their little tests that don't really have conclusive results. And the truth is that most people are not learning a language in school. So it doesn't matter what we think and what the science is. For the first time in history with Duolingo, and of course, I know I wear the shirt. I love the company, but with Duolingo, we could measure how hundreds of millions of people were learning at once by looking at data on a day-to-day basis. And so we could see whether if we taught verbs first or adjectives first, how it impacted learning and people's ability to progress to the next level. We can measure whether people retain information and can progress or not. We can measure how long people stick to it. We can measure whether people went from this level in the CEFR, which is sort of how you measure language acquisition, to this level. And with hundreds of millions of data points, we could run A/B tests at statistical significance on a very regular basis. And so this is really transformational for education. And ironically, most people, especially teachers at the time, were like, well, this is just a game and apps are bad and we don't even know anything. And there's so much scrutiny on the apps. And it's like, wait a minute, but who's measuring what you're doing? And who's measuring whether what you're doing works? Because last time I checked, no one's learning a language actually. So don't we think that there's a fundamental problem? So Duolingo was really focused on solving that and not only giving people access to study a language, but actually to learn without spending hundreds, thousands of dollars, which most people who need to learn English to improve their lives can't afford. And so this was really transformational because in a lot of cases, Duolingo was more effective than the teacher. Because, for example, in Brazil, a lot of English teachers don't actually speak English. Now, that is not to say that there are not amazing teachers out there. There are incredible teachers out there. And those incredible teachers can not only do more than Duolingo, but with apps like Duolingo, they can go even further. But we took a very scientific approach to looking at data and measuring learning and creating a learning metric over time, and then running studies with universities to prove that we were actually making a difference in people's lives. And then we heard things like, oh, I skipped a semester of French with Duolingo. And so it was really fun to work with that from a marketing perspective.
Definitely fascinating. 100%. And it's really interesting, but I'd like to just move you on just a little bit. And could you you're the COO and co-founder of Latitude. So could you tell us what is Latitude and what is your goal?
Yes. And I'm sorry I ramble, I get really excited.
No, don't be sorry.
I hope it's okay. So I am the co-founder and COO of Latitude. We're still working on our elevator pitch. But we've been around for a year and a half now, which is crazy to think about. And basically, over the last few years, I keep getting asked to mentor tech startups all over the world. In some cases in Japan, such as the US, or in Europe, and in Latin America mainly. And there are incredible entrepreneurs all over the world. People solving huge problems with like such ambition. And there are a couple of things that I observed. First is that like there's just like some fundamental things that some entrepreneurs just don't have access to knowing. Like they'll ask me questions and I'm like, this is obvious, but it's only obvious to me because I got to work with some of the top tech companies in the world and I got to live and breathe that, which most people don't have the opportunity to do, and to be in touch with like the top of the top. The second is that like in Brazil and Latin America over the past 10 years, there's been a trend of like, ooh, like we want to grow in Brazil, we want to grow in Mexico, and then once we make it, we're going to go to Silicon Valley, which like seemed to me kind of weird because it's like Silicon Valley is so different. Like there's so much competition versus Brazil and Mexico or Colombia. There's just so much more similarities in Latin America. And so and then the third thing is that like in Latin America in particular, in developing countries, but I speak for Latin America because that's where I'm from, everything is harder. And Johanna, will know this. Everything is harder. Like getting from point A to B is harder because the public transportation is kind of crappy and you might get mugged or you might get kidnapped on the way. The government might like come up with like random laws that suddenly like make you bankrupt, or the economy might collapse, from one year to the next. And I don't know, there's just every single thing. I talk about like the little things, like even like bureaucratic, you're trying to get a document or you're trying to open a company, everything is super tough for no good reason. And that's one of the reasons I left, honestly, plus a fear of getting kidnapped. that is real. I just thought like there's just so many blockages, like so many blockers in front of amazing, ambitious entrepreneurs that are going to prevent them from succeeding for no good reason. It's just because they were born in Latin America, and Latin America needs those solutions that they're coming up with. So what can we do to change this at scale? During that time, these conversations started happening once I met my co-founder, Brian Reckworth. So I have two co-founders, Yuri Danielchenko and Brian Reckworth. I met Brian first, and he sold his last company for $600 million in Brazil. So he kind of built the Zillow of Brazil. Like he's an OG tech startup guy, 2010, 2011 in Brazil, was friends with all the other OG tech startup guys like David Bellis, who founded Nubank, which recently made the news internationally. And we started talking exactly about this and how can we make a difference. And not only that, but in my lifetime, I've seen Brazil and Latin America be up and coming, in quotes, like twice, and then crash. Like, oh my God, it's so exciting. There's so much happening in Latin America, crash. Oh my God, like the next place to invest in Latin America, crash. And now we're there again. We're in the up and coming, like Latin America is exciting. Everyone wants to invest. There's so much opportunity. How do we prevent the crash? Because if we don't do anything differently, I think that's where we're headed again. And so that's kind of Latitude. Latitude was created to solve the problems and remove barriers from the lives of amazing Latin American entrepreneurs who are trying to solve problems at scale. And we do that in a number of different ways. First, we have education and community. So we have a fellowship program. It's tough to get into. There's an admissions process. And then once you get in, there's a 6-week program. Every week there's a theme, and every day you learn from someone who we consider to be the best of the best. And that's like founders of top tech companies, but also less aspirational people, like actual operators, someone who led growth at like a company you've heard of, someone who led design at a company you've worked, someone who didn't lead, but actually was in the weeds and like learned a bunch, kind of like you guys are asking me about growth. We'll do a talk or we'll do a workshop. That also gives people an excuse to join a program together. And this is across all of Latin America, which is also very unusual. Normally things are country specific. Gives people the opportunity to meet other amazing people who are also trying to change things massively and are going on this crazy journey of entrepreneurship together, to share their experiences and to help each other get farther much more quickly. So if someone's like, hey, I'm trying to build a growth team and I don't know where to start, like Gina can be like, hey, oh my God, I just did that last week. Actually, I just finalized my plan. So why don't I just get on the phone with you and explain everything I learned? So you don't have to go and read everything and research everything from scratch. And when you think of that multiplied by hundreds of thousands of connection points, that can really make a big difference. So that's a fellowship program, and we now have 800 people in the community. We have 10 cohorts that we're running this year, and we're doing fellowship programs not just for early stage entrepreneurs, like people who might have an idea or have tons of experience and could have an amazing idea but are afraid of leaving their jobs because it's uncertain, but all the way through to the people who are thinking about investing in tech startups and giving them the best tools and communities to invest more intelligently, to scale that, and then also to become a reference for international investors who want to put money into Latin American startups. So we can increase not just the number of amazing entrepreneurs, remove the barriers from their ways while they're at it, give them best practices, but also bring more money into the ecosystem and more smart money by connecting people who know a lot with entrepreneurs. So that's the fellowship piece. We also have a fund. So we raised $10 million last year. We invested in 70 something companies. And that was it was the first rolling fund in Latin America. If anyone is interested in what that is, you can go to Angel Lists and check out rolling funds. It's kind of a new thing. We're raising a much larger fund this year. We're launching a fund of funds to enable more people to launch their own funds. So we can have like a fund focused on women, a fund focused on deep tech. Like the people who are most well positioned to invest tend to be entrepreneurs or people who are high up at tech startups because they can see opportunities. They know others in the ecosystem, so they're going to hear first about when there's like a cool thing going on. And so they're most well positioned to find really cool stuff instead of like the guy who's the investor and studied like finance and did investment banking and is sitting somewhere and trying to like reach out and find what's up. So that's what we're trying to empower. And then the third piece is we're actually building products to solve problems for Latin American startups. And we launched something called Latitude Go a few weeks ago, which makes it super easy to incorporate your startup in Brazil in the right way that basically protects you from all kinds of tax liabilities, which ends up kind of being really problematic for startups, and they don't know about it in the beginning. So my co-founder lost the equivalent of $100 million because he incorporated his company wrong. at the scale of his company. So we do it now with like a whole like sandwich structure where you have like a local entity, a Delaware LLC, a Cayman holding sandwich, and we like do that at the click of a button. But we're starting to identify all of the other like top problems that are impacting entrepreneurs and solving them through products. And then the last piece is education through media and content. So anyone who's interested in entrepreneurship and investing in entrepreneurship and tech in Latin America can follow us on social media or our newsletter.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. I admire what you do. I know quite a few entrepreneurs that have been through the program. I wasn't aware of this other line on angel investors and empowering investors, which we probably need to talk about it after this call, because I love that too. In terms of this, how do you select the companies? I'd love to know what do you look for in a company or in a team?
We are constantly evolving this, and it also depends, right? Because we don't like Y Combinator is a very well-known like sort of accelerator type thing in the US. They invest in every company that comes in. So criteria changes a little bit because we don't invest in all the companies that come in. And we accept people who are like want to be an entrepreneur. They're not even an entrepreneur yet. They might have been like head of product at a really well-known tech company, like I don't know, Rappi, and they've identified an amazing opportunity and they want to figure out what they want to build. So some people can come in without an idea even. What we try to look for in the program, and that especially I think anyone who's listening to this podcast and might be interested in becoming a tech entrepreneur and is based in or wants to build for Latin America, we look for a number of criteria that we've identified. And I won't go into each one of them because they're quote unquote like proprietary, but basically we try to look for people who have a kind of like an unfair advantage in terms of like they really can succeed at doing something in tech or in the area that they're in. And what does that mean? So one, I'll go over a couple of them. One of them is deep expertise in something. So for example, in our last cohort, we had a doctor, she's a doctor at one of the best hospitals in Brazil. She's not worked with tech, but she was working on an app and kind of didn't really know how to go about it. But she knows so much about medicine and the problem, and she was building an app for doctors. So she knows the pain points of a doctor's day-to-day very well. And so she's very well positioned to identify a problem that needs a solution. And we might be able to bring the other piece to help think through how to do that. So deep expertise in an area could be like by studying it, by working in an industry for a long time. The second is, you've worked at a tech startup in some sort of key position. Sometimes it's position of leadership. And if it's not, it's like you've led impressive initiatives. So you really understand how, a piece of that pie works, and you understand how the building a team in a startup works. And it should be a well-known or a successful startup. Or that's another one that you've tried to start a company before and you're a failed entrepreneur, but you learned so much in that experience that now you're ready to do it again. So there's a number of things we look for like that. And then of course there are diversity criteria that we really care about. Like we want to make sure that we're selecting people from across Latin America and not, for example, just skewing Brazil. We want to make sure that there's enough women, that there's people of color, that there's like, low socioeconomic, and we're not low socioeconomic status applicants. We're not doing an excellent job at it, by the way. Those are parts of, that's a part of all of our KPIs and OKRs, objectives and key results, so that we're constantly striving and figuring out new ways to focus on that.
Amazing. Well, we'll be still cheering up for you and for Latitude. And I'd like us to talk about another topic that you mentioned at the beginning, and is mental health. So you brought that up, you suffered it, I also suffered it, and I know a lot of people that have suffered it. Getting out of it was one of your proudest moments, and we'd like to know, how did you do that? And also, what advice would you give to a young person feeling the same?
So getting out of it was a process, to be honest. So I would say there's like the short term and then there's the long term. The short term was, I would say, accepting help is really important, because like I just got to a point where I couldn't really get out of bed. And so then you just kind of like, whatever, you want me to go to the therapist, I go to the therapist. Like, you want me to take this medicine, I'll take this medicine, whatever, and fortunately, I think that's kind of what you have to do, because you can't help yourself. So you need to accept the help. I also am a big fan of medicine. I started taking, so when in college, I actually went to a therapist. I really didn't connect with this person. They gave me Zoloft. It didn't help me at all. And so then I thought, wow, there's like nothing will help me. Like it's a lost cause. But that's not how it works. And I went to another therapist when I got back to Brazil. They gave me tiny dose at the time. It fluctuated over the years, but like it already started making a huge difference. And then there are things that I learned as time went on to maintain my sanity. So one of them is workouts is super important. Physical exercise really matters. So like keeping that on a regular basis, no matter if you don't feel like it, and if you what I do is I wake up and I do 20 minutes of exercise every day. 20 minutes is not a lot. I'm not going to go run a marathon, but it's a habit. I don't have to think about it. I put on my clothes and I get out there. It means I also get fresh air, and it means I get some energy in my body, and it affects my brain. So that really matters. The other thing that I learned also in the sort of short term is the days that I'm feeling my worst and I don't want to get out of bed, I need to get up and put on makeup and do my hair, which is like you really don't want to do that. Like you just don't, but you're just like you have to, because then you immediately feel better about yourself and you go out and it like makes a difference. Like when I'm feeling my worst is when I want to dress my best for me, not for others, because that's like what keeps me going. And I think the other lesson is you are your own mom, so to speak. Yes, we all have moms and they're amazing, and thank God for my mom, but I'm my own mom, and every day like I have to take care of me. So this is kind of like a little bit cringe, I think, for everyone listening to this, but like in the morning, I actually still today, and I'm 35 years old, I write a little list of like things I'm thankful for, and then how did I take care of myself in the last 24 hours? And I'll actually list, like, I made my green juice, I went and worked out, I did like da 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 da, because like it keeps me like it, kind of sane in that way. The main advice I'd give is like take it a day at a time. When things look like they're not going to get better, it's just because you are in that moment and you can't see beyond it, but it will get better, and you just need to get yourself through that moment. And so, yeah, it's tough. It's really tough.
Gina, you've been absolutely amazing with your time today. And we just have, I suppose the last thing I'm going to ask is what's next for you? What plans have you got?
Well, Latitude is definitely like 150% of my time right now, and that's what I'll be focusing on for the next foreseeable future. So hopefully we'll build something really impactful there and be able to scale it. I also am quite a nomad, so I'll probably be moving around. Also, after 10 years, I finally have the right to apply for citizenship in the US. I'll probably do that. And so, that's all I can see. But one thing I learned that I like to share with others, especially young people, is it's really hard to know what's ahead. And people ask me this a lot in job interviews, like where do you see yourself in 3 years, 5 years? Like that exercise is just interesting to think about, like what are goals that you might want to achieve. But I could have never predicted 2 steps ahead at any point in my career, because think about how wiggly that line was. Like things didn't work out, then they kind of started, but I didn't really realize that they would connect to the next thing. When I started working at Duolingo, I was like, oh, that makes sense, because I taught English like to shantytown communities when I was in school. So obviously I care about language education. Looking back, everything makes sense and all the points connect. But when you're in the present and looking into the future, it's really hard to see more than 1 step ahead. And so you just have to take that next step, and it'll lead you to steps that you wouldn't have imagined before. Like when you get to the top of that hill, you look around and you're like, whoa, there's a mountain, but you couldn't have seen the mountain if you were like at the bottom of the hill being like, I want to climb mountains. Like you just couldn't have. And literally, like Tumblr didn't exist when I was in school. Duolingo didn't exist when I was in school. Latitude didn't exist when I was at Duolingo. Like none of these things existed, and the world is changing so quickly that you can't really see beyond. So I only know what's next, like next for me right now in the next year, and hopefully that will lead to more. But I don't know, and I embrace that.
Thank you so much, Gina.
Yes, that's wonderful, Gina. Thank you so much for your time. We learned a lot with you today. And yes, as said, we're going to keep cheering for you and for Latitude moving forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And if I may, like a last word, I will continue cheering for anyone who's trying to figure out their next steps right now. And will say that I had no idea what I wanted to do for most of the time. In fact, every day I have a moment of like, I am not qualified for what I'm doing right now. And I know that it sounds like imposter syndrome, but it's not. It's just imposter, period. Like I really don't think that, like, so it's fine. And when people look like they know what they're doing, like your boss or whatever, they don't. And the more mean they are, the less they know. It's just what it turns out to be. So just keep your head up.
Awesome. Fantastic way to close. Thank you so much.
That was the absolutely brilliant Gina Gotthilf, and she was joining us on the podcast today. I'm so happy. She was so nice.
Yes, so nice. What a pleasure. Is that kind of people you just don't want to stop spending time with and talking. We could be here for hours and hours.
We might have to do a part 2 on this one, Johanna, because, you know, on her LinkedIn, she's got a picture with Obama, which is a bit mad, Barack Obama. And then she also worked on Mike Bloomberg's presidential campaign. So there's definitely a part 2 there, maybe a part 3, who knows?
Yes. We'll follow up on her, as we said, and on the progress of Latitude, which is creating a huge impact already in the region. So yes, congratulations to Gina, all her co-founders, and I hope everybody has enjoyed it as much as we did doing it.
Absolutely. And you can catch us at How to Be the Difference at the Intern Group, or across all social at the Intern Group. And until next time, thanks a million, Johanna. Thanks, Gina.
Thanks a million, Paul. Get well. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.